So hello once again on our second meeting of Around the World in a Day. Today, my guest is Robert Gibson, and I'm so excited that finally we managed to discuss about your book. I'm a really huge fan of it, and even here with me, I have it and applying each time to my trainings. So just a few words, what is Around the World in a Day series. It's a new project run by Theater Polska, hosting by me, Monika Guzek, and with guests, we are discussing intercultural topics, looking at different perspectives, also how the trends change, how we perceived even what is happening around us, sharing the stories, personal experiences when we sometimes fail, or maybe we had some funny topics to share with you. I'm as well intercultural trainer and president of Theater Polska itself. I'm also working in academia in Poznań University of Economics and Business. So today with Robert, we will touch all these areas because I see that some of you as well from academia, from business, and as well they are trainers, maybe curious about the book. So Robert, if you could few words about yourself, for those of you who maybe never had the chance to see you before.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Monika. Thank you for inviting me also to Theater Polska. And it's very good to see people, some familiar faces, some people I feel I know, but probably just know from LinkedIn or Twitter or somewhere. But it's great to see you in person. And I'm talking to you tonight from Munich in Germany. And yeah, I've been involved with the intercultural field for over 30 years in various roles, some of the time in universities and more recently, the last 20 years in business. I was responsible for intercultural training at Siemens for 18 years, the electrical engineering company, and also do some I've done teaching for the last 10 years at Bologna Business School, so in a more academic environment. So I'm happy to talk about any of those points too. So that's a little bit about myself. I'm originally from the UK, but now I'm a German British national. My wife is from China, so I also experience culture 24/7 in my life.
So I also will be curious, to get some insights from you. This is also my life, 24/7 interculturally living, and I believe some of our participants too. But I would love always ask my guests about, your first encounter, like international, how it happened that, you start to be into this topic, that you find out your culture gap itself.
Yeah, I was thinking of that question, and yeah, in my childhood, actually, it was a time I was brought up in London, and my parents didn't travel abroad at all, really much. And it was only when I decided that I wanted to study German, and I had some time between school and university, and I went on a scheme which was called Be a Berliner scheme. At that time, of course, Berlin was divided. And they found you a job and a family to stay with, and I stayed in West Berlin and had a job, in fact, for Siemens, where I ended up much later on working for them full-time, but I was just like an intern. And that really showed me, I traveled a lot to East Berlin, and it really opened my eyes. Same national culture, but two different cultures, two different political systems in the same town. But perhaps the real breaking point was, and this is the link with Poland, why I feel such an affection for Poland, was in the 1980s when I did some teaching. I was teaching English in some summer camps in Poland. So my first one was in Słubice, which is on the Oder River, the other side of Frankfurt and the Oder, in 1981. Very interesting, very challenging, but very exciting time in Poland. And then I was later a couple of times in Brzesko, south of Krakow. And there I fell in love, of course, with a Polish girl. And my first breaking point with culture was our relationship when I was invited to see her family for the first time in Warsaw. I remember going to the flat in Marszałkowska Street in Warsaw, and the granny opened the door, stretched out her hand, and I went into overtime trying to impress them with remember my father saying there's nothing worse than having a handshake like a wet fish. Gave her a really strong handshake, and her face dropped, and my friend and I thought, what have I done wrong? And my friend shouted at me and said, why did you do that? You know, and I said, well, what did I do? And of course, she expected me from that generation to kiss her hand, and I had shaken it, and the granny didn't understand, I didn't understand, and my friend didn't understand. And we had a lot of those incidents. And I sort of worried about my personality, but I realized some things were cultural. So that was a turning point, I think. That
yeah, and you know, it's really interesting for me to listen this, because my first encounter was as well in Germany. I'm living exactly 60-70 kilometers, my hometown, it's 60-70 kilometers from Słubice, where you were first time in Poland. So it's really interesting, because my experience started as well, like, so, you know, learning German and traveling there. And I was, because this was partnership cities. So when I was training athletic as a teenager, we had a lot of camps, and we also were going to this east part of Germany. So it's really interesting that we are coming, you know, from two different cultures, two different like generations, and there's so many common points. And as well, I love this story about Poland, how a lot of things, you know, turn. And yeah, this is the biggest faux pas which you can you can do to your grandma. I mean, now it would be much more less like expected, I would say. When I look at my grandma, she never expected this. But yeah, in that time there was much more old-fashioned, let's say, and funny. And I as well, like now, of course, we had this conversation in Malta. So I really love this story when you find out, you know, about Polish women and managing style.
That's another topic. Yeah, we need more time for that. Yeah.
Yes. So this is something like how we perceived. Okay, but so how did it happen that you back to Germany? You were so influenced by culture, or you know, did you back to Siemens?
Yeah, that was a bit of a long story. I mean, first of all, I also think that very important is the role of teachers. I mean, my interest in Germany was really because I had a very, very good teacher at school, my German teacher, and I decided to study German, and I was a teacher of German for a while. And then I got the opportunity to work at Munich University, actually. I thought I'd just go there for a year to improve my German. But actually, I ended up staying there. That was in 1985 since then. I remember when I was teaching English, one of the things I had to teach was something they called Landeskunde, which is cultural studies. You know, and I found this quite boring. They had to learn how many members of parliament there were in Britain, and all about the Congress and so forth, in the power of the president in the US. And I tried to make this interesting. And I really realized that actually the interesting things in this cultural field were not happening in this university, in the English department. They were happening in some companies. And actually a turning point was also discovering theater and going to a conference in Kilkenny. I think maybe George will remember, I think it was in 1990. And I went to this conference in Kilkenny. And I was sitting between somebody from the World Bank and some NGO from the Peace Corps or something at lunch the first day. And I thought, wow, this is interesting. What have these two people got in common? This guy in a big suit and very smart, and this girl in sandals. You know, it was almost like a stereotype. And we were all interested in culture. And I realized, there's something happening here. And after some years in university, I managed to then get a job in industry in 2000 at Siemens, and was responsible for their training. My original job was actually to link languages and intercultural training, but in fact, we decided to do the opposite and to split them into two different departments. And in the final years, the last 5 years or so, I got much more involved with diversity as well, which is a very interesting area too, which I think a lot of interculturalists are getting involved with now.
So now maybe I will come with the question which I discussed even before the session with Bernd, and it was your question. So how did trends change, you know, in this area of diversity, inclusion, equity? We can observe this.
Yeah, I think there are quite a lot of trends in the intercultural field. And I know there's a lot of interest in this. Actually, I've seen that from LinkedIn, that when I post something about trends, people are thinking about where are we going. And we had this, some of you were there. Bastian was one of the organizers of this fantastic conference from CETA in Malta, where we were looking at where is interculturalism going. And I think there are quite a few trends that are very important. Things have changed a lot since I sort of got involved in 1990s, 2000. It's really changed greatly, the field. I remember the days when I could go to a bookshop in London and buy practically every book on the topic, but this is not possible anymore. I'd have a whole library of books. But basically, I think one of the big trends is to move away from national cultures, looking at those cultures and trying to map national cultures, which is what I think a lot of people were doing 20 years ago, and to say, okay, we need to think of multi-collectivity, multiple cultural identities. And I think that's the link with diversity, because I think those involved in diversity are also looking not at just one dimension, hopefully not just race or gender, but many different dimensions of diversity, including physical ability, including age, including professional culture. And that is an important link, I think, that people are making, that we have a lot in common, and we're actually all talking about diversity, and we're also talking about creating an inclusive environment, about how we can make people feel that they belong in organizations, for instance. The other big area, which I really can't pretend to be an expert on, but I know that some of you are also very interested in this, is the area of neuroscience. I think there's just been massive developments in how we understand how the brain works, and this is partly connected with the technology, the sort of technology actually that my colleagues at Siemens were developing in scanning the brain and in MRI and so forth, where you can look and see what's happening. And I think that has big implications for us in understanding how the brain works, how we filter the information that we get, how we make decisions. So that's a whole big area, which I think is going to continue to be very fascinating. And the last area, which we really, I think, was central for me from the conference in Malta, but needs to be taken further, is the area of trying to find new perspectives on interculturalism, on diversity, not just the Anglo-European perspective. I was quite shocked by one of the opening plenary speeches in Malta, where somebody had done analysis of academic papers on these topics, these issues, and found how it was so dominated by research done in the USA, for instance, or in the UK, or in some European countries. So finding new perspectives, completely new ways of seeing these cultural topics. And that's quite challenging, I think, because we tend to think these things maybe are universal when they're not. So I would like to see more perspectives coming from the African continent, from India, from China, as to how people see culture, how they see these management topics as well, or business topics.
And definitely when I'm thinking even, about my experience living in Asia, then it was challenging everything, like my values, my way, of being itself, that I perceived even my independency, or like how I'm taking decision, completely different that in their reality, in their companies even are doing. So
that's quite correct. And the other thing that is really changing, I think, is the target group, who, if we're trainers, I know many people in Seattle are trainers. There are some people doing research, of course, and educationists, but from the training perspective, there are new target groups, actually, I think, for training. When I first started, I think most of the people, a lot of them were managers, a lot of the books were written for managers, or some of them were students. But now I see demand, obviously, from people dealing with migration. That's a big, big topic, I think. I get people approaching me in Munich, where we had a few years ago very high numbers of people coming to the town from other places, social workers trying to cope with the challenges of dealing with unaccompanied children, for instance. And obviously, we've got that with the conflict in Ukraine and so forth. I don't have to tell you that in Poland, but also in Germany, we feel that need, or in the UK, Seattle UK is doing wonderful project with refugees. Also, though, I've had some interesting inquiries from people like in the medical profession, as towns like Munich, where I live, become more multicultural. So the medical system, people are having to cope with people with different cultural backgrounds. And with that comes a different expectation of how they're treated. How far do you involve the family in making medical decisions? How far what services does a hospital provide? How do people talk about pain, for instance? Quite different in different places. And if you don't know about that, that can be quite dangerous, actually. And I think there's a growing awareness amongst medical professionals that they also need this. So I think it's a very exciting time to be involved with intercultural issues. And as I say, if we keep our eyes open for the new developments that are happening.
Yeah, now when you said even about the medical area, let's say hospitals, doctors, and so on. My father is a doctor, and he was giving me example a few years ago. We were discussing this topic, and he told me that even in Poland they can observe a huge difference when, for example, there are people like elder people, and they are coming to hospital. So what is their background, medical, the resources background? So it depends if they are coming from Western Poland or Eastern, because in the past, of course, the wars and so on, we were huge, like it was influenced of them managing and collecting data. And these simple things, of course, as well influence. And regarding to what you said, I think that as well it's changed. I'm looking as well at the younger generation, and for me the best group to observe, they are my students, because of course when they are coming to the corporate, to the organization and so on, they are starting from different point. Even when I was starting, that I remember when I was 23, I went for my Erasmus to Berlin exactly. And I had no clue about, diversity itself. Like we knew that we are different at university. We could already observe a lot of people. Like I grown up in intercultural, I would say, environment. But then it was for me like huge shock culture that, okay, people communicate differently. I had this bias that I thought that I know the culture, but then I was in this culture and I was like, oh my God, they are asking me so many questions. They are more direct than I am. And I thought that I was direct. So I would say that even now, what it's how my students perceiving this cultural diversity. I'm also running some courses or trainings, and they are challenging me each time when, for example, I present them some schemas, like putting, for example, they are more hierarchical, egalitarian, and so on, and they are asking like, why are we putting people to the boxes? This is not how it should be, right?
No, I think there's a question against this categorization of people.
Yeah.
And one of the professors in Germany calls it Jürgen Bolton. He talks about fuzzy cultures, that it's not static and things are changing. And I found actually my experience also with students when teaching in Bologna at the business school. I'm very fortunate to have people from different. When they do the MBA program, they have a so-called concentration. So some are studying sustainable energy, they call it green energy. Some are studying fashion and luxury goods. These are all things that the area in Emilia-Romagna in near Bologna are involved with. And some are studying food and wine. There's actually an MBA in food and wine in Bologna, because that's very important for that region. And the interesting thing is when these students from these different concentrations, they're from different countries, but when they come together from these different professional backgrounds, we talk a lot about the different, the influence of those professional backgrounds too. So they defy all the categories according to the national cultural differences that people traditionally talked about. When you start focusing on that and realizing, okay, maybe there's a gulf between the IT people and the HR people or whatever. So it's a question, I think, of being aware of all those multi-collectivity, multiple cultural identities, and not just focusing on one element. And that then gets very interesting. So to me, the only way of doing that is really focusing on real cases, on their experience, getting people to reflect on themselves and how they perceive other people.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with this. I see that George raised his hand. So George, if you would like to.
Yeah, the thing you mentioned about new target groups is really critical. And for example, we've had games in the diversity series about healthcare for the US, for Europe, for Germany, for over a dozen years. And the interesting thing is that it's not just for the people who are there, but we find that we've got medical professionals. If you look at the medical professionals in your country, how many of them are natives? We have massive amounts of nurses from the Philippines, for example. Here in France, the nurses are coming from the Maghreb. from North Africa. And so facing that, and the other thing is that we've been facing the Ukraine business. And for any of you who are involved in that, we've got free games in a half dozen languages now and 5 more on the way about Ukraine culture, multilingual, so that you can actually learn about Ukrainian culture and Ukrainians can learn about your culture, both in your own language. This is a major effort that we're trying to make at this point, and it's building on, and you know, it's identifying the people who can use these resources and get them in their hands. I mean, most of us have lots of stuff going on that we can share with people, but getting it out there with the right people to use it, the new target groups, as you say, is a real challenge.
I think I would agree with you, George. Thank you for that. I mean, I think we've got a lot of knowledge, and it's a question of disseminating this. Perhaps it's a bit overwhelming for people coming into the field. This is why I tried, like with my book, to make it quite simple, because I wanted to reach people. And some people, critical people, have said, "Oh, but this is all old stuff." Well, it's old stuff, but it's not reached all the people that need it. And if you don't have the stuff, you then go back to old stereotypes and so forth. If you don't have this. So I think it's great what you're doing with these games, the gamification of this. And I can only endorse what you say about it's not just the patients, but also the medical staff. My sister worked in the NHS as a hospital manager, and they had in the UK a lot of nurses from the Philippines, and they had big issues with the communication style and so forth. They felt the senior nurses felt that the Philippines were not taking responsibility. It was a classic thing, and the nurses felt from the Philippines they weren't be given clear instructions and stuff like this, you know, and they had a different attitude to healthcare. So we're going to see that with this massive mobility of labor, people moving around more than ever before. So it's a boom time, and I think we have a responsibility, and I think an organization like CIETA has a responsibility to make the knowledge that we have and all our expertise accessible to people who need it.
Yeah, definitely, yes. That's why we have even an open meeting like this, and I know that also other theaters are running, that we can spread this knowledge further, and new trends as well. Kasia, I see that you raised your hand.
Yes, hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Okay, first of all, thank you for this event, for this meeting. I was very much looking forward to it, so I'm very glad that I can actually ask this question, because you've mentioned about like going away from the like national cultures, new trends in the field, etc., etc. And even you, Monika, said about your students being like sort of surprised by putting people into cultural boxes. Let's call it like this. Yeah. And yet I'm listening to this, and because I've heard it a lot of times about this, like dropping out this national cultures theories. But then I have a classroom full of students from different fields, from different like studies, from as it was said, from art studies to engineering, from many different places in the world. So they have such a diverse backgrounds that. Again, the Hofstede is the easiest one to like explain them what is the deal with intercultural communication. And my question is, maybe you can give some practical examples for the trainer as me for a better idea how to explain this topic to non-interculturalists than the national cultures. That is my question.
Monika, you want to answer that one?
Yeah, I can answer, then you can follow. So for example, what I'm doing, of course, that this is not that I'm not using this background, the researches and years of collecting knowledge. It's much more that I also have diverse group of students coming from really around the world, from African countries, Asian, Latin America, and so on. And what we mostly are doing, it's discovering like the that, for example, this is how we can perceive that people might be from that side, or like, you know, more or less giving the background, what is coming there. So today I will talk a lot, I think, about hierarchy and egalitarian way, because it was today the topic of my workshop, but that I'm showing that there might be two different approaches, and they classified where they are. It's not, I'm sharing with them that, okay, you as, for example, Polish, Brazilian, and so on, you should be here, because this is something where they really don't like to see them on the scale somewhere where they are not pointing themselves. So I'm using this, and then we are checking like, okay, so in the group, for example, how you perceive others, how others perceive themselves, like much more about self-awareness, and as well, Robert, what you are mentioning, that checking how we have and others with who we cooperating, not really putting in these boxes. It's I think it's still challenging and difficult to do that. But I also like to use some exercises, even like task which you have in your book. So I'm really excited and waiting for my new group of students to learn and check how to use these tools, how they also perceive it, these communication challenges and so on. Not really looking at, okay, we are from this side or this side, just where we point ourselves by ourselves.
Yeah, I really like the point that you make, because I think that, to be realistic, a lot of people they want help, and we have to I think we have to recognize this. If I have a family who are going to China in 2 weeks' time, they don't just want some general thing, be open and nice to people and be mindful. That's not enough. They want something concrete. I wanted something concrete when I went to my wedding in Beijing, and I bought lots of books which were full of stereotypes and things. And there's a reason why I'm very jealous of Erin Meyer's culture map, because it was on the bestseller, and I'm looking forward to the day when I will overtake her, but I don't think that will happen very quickly. But that book is also a little bit Hofstede, Trompenas like dimensions. So my approach is to say, I introduced my students to these cultural dimensions. I talk about uncertainty avoidance, or power distance, or different communication styles, all those things, different concepts of time. But where I think I would say I would differ is to try and get away from linking those categories to particular national culture, and saying these are just, some people are low context and some people are higher context, and you need to know who you're dealing with. And like Monika suggested, really base a lot on what is in the group. So if you have an international group of students with all those different backgrounds, it's a wonderful resource. So I do a lot of work with them, making up and providing. They describe critical incidents, something that's happened to them, and get each other to analyze, well, what was going on there? What did you experience today in Bologna when you got on the bus and you had a strange reaction from the driver? Was it somebody being racist? Was it you did something wrong? Was it, what was going on here? And so it's a lot of self-reflection based on what the students themselves generate. So when I do an exam at the end of the course, I ask them to write a critical incident and then analyze it using their knowledge of all these theories that we present to them, and then make recommendations. How can one deal with that? How could they themselves have dealt with this better? So I find that basically I'm training them in self-reflection and an awareness of their own cultural background by doing this. But I think it would be a mistake to deny all the theories that have gone before. This has given us a language which is, to some extent, useful to describe things that mean something. I find it helpful to the term collectivism when I'm in China. I realize that when I go in a restaurant, that you don't just order a meal by yourself, but you order for the group. That helps me to behave properly at that table. It doesn't mean to say that all Chinese are collectivists, which is far from truth. There's a generation now which are very different from the generation that those theories were based on. But I think it's really, I would urge you to try to use that wonderful resource of those students in that room and all their experience, and you're helping them to develop their own framework for putting that into some sense and to know how to behave.
Thank you, Robert. I see that as well, Bastian, you sent the message in the chat. yeah, that it's also to look at the component. Culture might be a component of that, exactly how people, who they are, and just to create this curiosity about the complexity of others. Definitely, this is something what I also try to promote, just giving them tips how, of course, and opening this topic. And even today, so yesterday and today, I was running a workshop, and one of participants, he was cooperating with India, and he was not aware that a lot of people, they don't say no, or that they don't say like we can't do this really directly. So then he went to this meeting after our workshop, and he said like, yeah, I start listening like really carefully what they're saying, and I could hear completely different messages than in the past, and it's wonderful. And I was like, yes, this is how we also need to open a little bit our eyes from something which we are used to, and for us it's a natural way of listening or communicating and so on, to this other perspective, right? So yes, and yeah, so I have as well, Robert, question to you. So exactly what was the root cause, that you decided to write a book? So this was this challenge, or maybe something different?
Okay, I mean, I had written in 2000, when I was still working in universities, I wrote a little book. And when I was working full-time in a company, of course, I didn't really have much time for writing books. I wrote quite a lot of articles for magazines and so forth, but I didn't write a book. And people said to me, oh, you should write a new book. You know, this old one was nice, but it's out of date now. And it was very much based on like Hofstede and things. And I thought, I've got so much experience. And actually, I must admit, the lockdown provided me with an opportunity to do this, really. And I just set aside 10 weeks I was lucky to find a publisher. It's not very easy these days to find a traditional publisher. And they set me a deadline, and I realized I had 10 weeks. So I realized to write 50,000 words, I had to write 5,000 words a week. And that meant basically 1,000 words a day. So I treated it like a job. And it's the same time it took Luther to translate the New Testament into German in the Wartburg after the Reformation. It took him 10 weeks. He was also in a lockdown. He couldn't leave the castle. I could not really leave the home, and I'm very pleased I did that. I would advise anybody to do that. It was very satisfying to put together all my experiences. And I think writing about your experiences is also a very good thing to do, actually, as an interculturalist. That's why I like writing on LinkedIn and so forth. It's not just to get people to read stuff, but it's actually a very cathartic process for me to work through those experiences. So keeping a diary, or okay, it may not end up in a book, but just recording your experiences is part of this reflective activity. So I was very lucky to have that opportunity to do that. And it's nice then to put your ideas into some format there.
Mm-hmm. And for those of you who maybe, for those of our participants who hadn't had chance to look at your book before our session, to read this, if you could in few sentences describe what we can find there.
Okay, the book here is, I've got it with me by chance, accidentally. It's called Bridge the Culture Gaps. I found the title, by the way, to be a bit too dramatic, because it suggests a bit static cultures, but that's a compromise you have to make if you work with a publisher sometimes, but they want a catchy title. And basically what I try to do there is to, it's not a book for academics, it's a book for business people. And it's trying to put together what I consider to be the best practice that I found in my 18 years in a multinational company, things that worked for people, things that people found helpful. It tries to connect the areas that I mentioned before, diversity, culture, and neuroscience. It's got a lot of what's maybe a bit different from some of the books. It's interactive, so it contains exercises. It's designed actually to help people to work by themselves and to think about things. So it's got different types of activities. If you're a trainer, you can use them, of course, with your group, but it's basically a book for people to work through, like a self-help book by themselves. And it's also not just for managers, it's for all team members. So it's about collaboration, in diverse global teams, basically. And the last point, which I'm quite proud of, because my background was in English teaching, I've tried to write it in international English. So some of the native speakers might find it a little bit colorless, but I deliberately tried to restrict the vocabulary that I use and to make it accessible. I thought it was a bit sad that some very wonderful business books are written in a language and with so many idioms and things that I don't think somebody who's not been brought up in the US or America or in the UK would really be able to read this properly. So I want them to be able to read it without it being translated. And yeah, that's about basically, so it's about the sort of things that I've been talking about today, actually.
And so I can definitely approve that, yeah, language, it's really nice to, you know, like for not native speaker, it's really accessible and easy to read. That's why it's also like fast, you know, that you don't struggle sometimes, like you mentioned, that it's so many idioms or something like this. But I would add that some academics may use this, you know, like and for example, I love to use new exercises, new concepts on my students, and they really always appreciate this, because once what I heard, and this was the turning point for me, they told me like, are you just working at university, or you have, you know, something else to do in your life? And I was like, and I was like, oh my God, really? It was 5 years ago. That time I was still working as a manager. And then I said like, yeah, I'm working as a manager, you know, I explained my background. And it's like, okay, so we can be in this class and follow your lectures and so on. And then I see that they love everything what it's, you know, related for business, because most of them already are working. This is completely new generation that we remember in the past that, you know, they wanted the knowledge. They now want to experience, they want to self-reflect, and then they want something real cases from business. So that's why for me it's perfect. So I encourage all of you who are not only from business area but as well from academia to try to have a look and try.
Thank you, Monika, because I do feel actually, and I see that a bit in CETA, sometimes there's a bit of a gulf between the academics and the sort of practitioners, and I think that's a sort of cultural gap also to be bridged. I think we're trying to do that, but sometimes the dialogue doesn't take place, and the academics are saying, "Oh, this you should be doing this," and the business people, we need something else. It's a bit like the debate I had with software architects and HR. You know, these are two worlds coming together, and we even have that in the intercultural community. And I feel very lucky to have been involved with both areas, because I think that interplay is so fruitful when it works, you know, to get really good research, but also research that is relevant for people in whatever they're doing.
Yeah, definitely. I see as well, you know, it's the universities which I'm cooperating with, that I'm one of the youngest, let's say, and then I'm bringing new, you know, perspectives, and then my colleagues even, they are saying like, oh wow, this is so nice. We don't need to bring all the knowledge from us and creating everything that students are enjoying. And I'm like, yeah, this is how it's working. So I definitely as well will encourage my students and other colleagues to have a look at this. And the last question which I have to you, it's about your moving back to UK. Maybe some of you who will be in the United Kingdom in the next months might meet Robert. So how it's happening exactly? What you gonna do there after so many years in Germany?
Yeah, as I said to you before, I've been in Germany since 1985. And now, yeah, we're not going to move fully, but we've got a flat now in Oxford in England. My wife and I, and we want to experiment with living there, spending some time in Germany, some time in China, some time in UK. And I think this will be it's already planning this has been quite an intercultural experience for me. Renting a flat in Britain is quite different from renting a flat in Germany, and sort of quite frustrating, because I think I know how things are from my memory of the first 28 years of my life, but actually, of course, things have changed a lot and things have moved on and things are quite different. So, and people are a bit surprised when I don't understand things, because they treat me as if I'd always lived there. They don't know my 35 years in Germany, and they don't treat me like a German. They just think this guy is a bit strange, or he's a bit slow, or a bit stupid, or something. I think, you know, when I ask what does that mean, and they, well, of course you know what that is, yeah. I didn't even know what HMRC was. That's the tax authorities, you know, and everybody knows HMRC, you know, because that's where you pay your tax to. And so I'm looking forward to that. And I think actually I don't know whether the rest of you have experienced this. It's very good as an interculturalist actually to sometimes be challenged by these situations. It's a bit like getting married in China. Although I was a already established interculturalist, I was quite frightened by that, and I was put in a situation where I was like one of my clients, and I realized, okay, it is quite challenging if you've got jet lag and you're tired and you're trying to make a good impression, and it's going to be, you're supposed to be happy and and stuff, and that maybe will be the same. There will be challenges, but I think it's going to be very interesting. So to find things from the past, but also new things that have changed since then.
Yes, I'm crossing fingers for you, and I'm really curious. Next year, I hope we're going to organize another webinar and discuss this topic.
Another book, perhaps.
Yeah, another book. I remember when I moved with my family to Portugal, and it was so challenging. I went through all stages, like of acculturation process. So from crying, and so on. And then my friends were saying like, but this how it is. You're like talking about this to people, right? And so like, yeah, but this is my emotions. It's way difficult. So this is, like you said, it's great experience to get to know first ourselves better and look at on this experience from different perspectives, like knowing all the background and knowledge and so on. But then when we experience this, it's way different.
Yeah.
So I would like to thank you so much for our conversation. It was really pleasant to talk to you, and I really recommend the book to all of you.
Thank you very much.
Yes, and now maybe it's the time for questions. If you have any questions, would like to get to know